Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the Suppress Herald podcast. It is Friday, the 23rd of January, 2026, and we are into the, you know, snowmageddon expected and cold and all the rest. And here in Suppress Herald world, we are seeing the absolute meltdown of the Suppress Herald propagandists. And it's like they're just completely losing their grip. And I'm going to spend in today's podcast, we are just going to talk about one editorial in today's Suppress Herald supposed newspaper. And this is just a unhinged screed by a dying breed. And that's the title. That's the name of today's podcast. The Unhinged Screed of a Dying Breed. This is by Steve Collins, who is a columnist for the Suppress Herald. He's an extreme liberal hack. He's supposedly was a reporter. He's never been a journalist in his life. He's a biased partisan hack who is on the editorial, one of the editorial writers regularly in the Suppress Herald. And we've featured his columns, his supposed, hit pieces basically on all sorts of things in the Suppress Herald. But he's part of the propaganda machine there. And this is the title of his editorial in today's Suppress Herald. The persistent slop of the main wire is paying off, by Steve Collins. It's clear to anyone watching that leading members of Maine's Republican Party, among many others, have fallen in line with the website's mission. The Main Wire is a news arm of the Maine Policy Institute. It is a conservative think tank in Portland. And because the Suppress Herald is part of the greater entire state newspaper conglomerate owned by the National Distrust for Local News, which at one time previously was owned by Congresswoman Shelley Pingree's husband, who was, I call him Alex Soros Mini-Me, buying up a newspaper and spending millions of dollars on backing liberal causes, and owned the newspapers in Maine. And since then, the consolidation of newspapers in Maine went even further, and now the Maine Distrust for Local News, a subsidiary of the National Distrust for Local News, which, by the way, is going bankrupt. And, the billionaire oligarchs on the liberal side, Claude Omidyar and George Soros and Bill Gates, funding the National Distrust for Local News, aren't going to fund it anymore because it's just losing money, because these people are recognized as nothing but propaganda, and half the population isn't going to pay to be propagandized to. The other half soaks it up because it reinforces their beliefs. That's not a newspaper. That is not journalism. What's really, really funny here, and this is hilarious to me, is this guy at the Suppress Herald talking about how the Main Wire and Steve Robinson, the editor in chief, the primary edit, does a lot of the editorial, has the Robinson Report podcast, also is an actual journalist who has uncovered a lot of, call it, criminal activity and beyond in Maine that the Suppress Herald in some way never picked up on, like the Chinese illegal grow facilities that have proliferated across Maine, buying up houses and small commercial garages, small commercial spaces, turning them into illegal grow rooms run by the triads out of China in collaboration with the Communist Party of China here in Maine. Massive, very big organization. And, they said there were up to 100 of these at one time. But you never heard about it in the Press Herald. They didn't even mention it. But Steve Robinson and the Maine Wire uncovered all of this and reported on it and made a lot of headlines for it. Now they're uncovering the same fraud, waste, and abuse that was happening in the Somali community in Minnesota right here in Maine. And as we dig deeper, we're finding more and more. And was the Suppress Herald in any way investigating, doing investigative journalism? No. But Steve Robinson and the Maine Wire were. And so here we have the Suppress Herald, like I say, a dying breed. They no longer matter. And it is driving them crazy. And this unhinged screed from Steve Collins says it all. This sums it up. This is where they are. They are crashing and they are burning. As you get into this, and this is okay, he talks about Republicans and you know, Steve Robinson and the Maine Wire causing, all sorts of angst and anxiety and all sorts of problems and causing, problems in Maine. He likes the old days when the liberals owned everything in the press and the media. That was much better because then they could just manipulate the masses, tell people what to think, tell people what they thought they should know, hide the rest, and basically control the population, an arm of the Democrat liberal parties. And this is how he gets started. Due to the tireless work of sensationalist news site that takes delight in assailing the most vulnerable people in Maine, GOP candidates scramble around our 16 counties trashing Somalis, bashing trans people, and excoriating China for allegedly turning every other rural property in the state into a drug factory. You said it, Steve. Steve Collins, lib wacko propagandist. You said all that. Steve Collins, or excuse me, Steve Robinson at the Maine Wire didn't say that. Now, the Maine Wire did expose the Somalis ripping off Maine Care, which is Medicaid in Maine, and other funding sources, federal funding sources, massively being ripped off, millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. That's been exposed. Yeah. Bashing trans people, all they've done is talk about boys playing in girls' sports here in Maine and stealing trophies and potentially hurting women and girls. This is a 80-20 at best, probably more like 90-95 to 5 or 10 issue in this country. They will not let it go. They're going to die on that hill. So this is bashing trans people. It's not bashing them. It's telling guys to stay out of the girls' locker room and don't play in their sports. It's that simple. And that's all it's been. And excoriating China for allegedly turning every other rural property. That's you, Steve Collins, saying that. That's not what the paper or the Steve Robinson and the Maine Wire have said. All they did was expose that there are a lot of these illegal grow facilities and the Chinese triads behind it. That has been well reported. You are saying it's excoriating China. Well, it's the Chinese, it's Chinese owners. They don't do this without the authorization of the Chinese Communist Party, who run everything. So, right off the first paragraph, that is just garbage, Steve Collins. Through hyperbole and scaremongering, the Maine Wire has risen from obscurity to become the dominant media player in Republican politics in Maine. This should concern us all. Well, I know it concerns you, Steve. All isn't you, Steve. You are becoming unhinged because you are becoming irrelevant. You don't matter because you're on the wrong side of history. Just for the record, Trump, by the end of 2026, is going to have a booming economy, and inflation is not going to be talked about, and growing economy with growing, expanding payrolls and people making more money, and the world is going to be a much safer and more peaceful place, and you can't stand it. So you're not talking for all. You're talking for you and your band of merry propagandists at the Suppress Herald, Steve. That's this should concern us all. Well, it doesn't concern us all, Steve. It actually makes us very happy that there's actually a journalist or two actually getting into the problems here in Maine and dealing with reality. For those unfamiliar with the outlet, some recent headlines may offer insight. This is great. Former Lewiston counselor melts down, smears award-winning Maine Wire editor-in-chief as neo-Nazi. Well, that is true. That's exactly what he did. Former Lewiston counselor. He's a former Lewiston counselor because he quit because he didn't live in the Lewiston district that he said he was living in. He was using a condemned building as his address. He also got arrested on gun charges. So the fact that the Maine Wire actually reported on the reality there should say a lot. He quit. He resigned and ran away because he was not, shouldn't legally be able to be a counselor, and he had gun charges against him. And and he did call Steve Robinson a neo-Nazi. Or Shelley's support of Minnesota anti-ICE hooligans brought her back to her radical roots. Well, that's what it is. Shelley Pingree, actually from Minnesota, she's from away, taking the side of criminals instead of taking a side of law and order and the immigration service to try and control immigration, illegals, illegal and criminal illegal immigrants. That is her roots. Or Maine Democrat Governor Janet Mills caught napping by Ohio GOP governor in Coast Guard competition. What's wrong with that headline? Oh, that's right, Steve Collins. It's your babe, Governor Mills, who you are supporting to take on Senator Collins, the Republican. And you don't like it that somebody actually reports reality. She did fall asleep. There's pictures of it, but not from the Suppress Herald. Maybe if we'd had pictures of Joe Biden falling asleep and falling down more by the mainstream media, we could have had something more positive happen in this country, like getting rid of Joe Biden sooner. You don't like it when reality happens. You don't like it when people report on actual news. She's at a Coast Guard competition. She fell asleep. What kind of detention is that? Then you have, earlier this week, the Maine Wire wrote a story about a young politically active Somali who criticized the site for stirring up anti-immigrant sentiment in Maine. The image of Safia Khalid that the editors pulled to accompany the piece shows her in a purple hijab, making a face while giving someone the finger. Well, it's just a picture. It was taken by a classmate in a school cafeteria more than 10 years ago. Well, it's the only picture he could find. And she's basically doing the same thing to Steve Robinson and the Maine Wire by going after them. She criticized the site for stirring up anti-immigrant sentiment. No, they're not stirring up anti-immigrant sentiment. They're reporting on reality. There are people ripping off this state for hundreds of millions of dollars of very valuable resources that are supposed to be used. They're always talking about the homeless, they're talking about the low income people, and they're talking about the poor here. Well, if hundreds of millions, what could hundreds in a small state like, low population state like Maine, hundreds of $1 million is a lot of money for services for people that actually really need it. Instead of Somalis, which it just happens to be, the Somali community figured out how to rip off government programs. It's on steroids in Minneapolis and Minnesota. It's also happening all over the country. They're finding it now in Ohio, and they're finding it here in Maine. And the suppressed Herald isn't going to report on it and actually go dig around. You actually have the Maine Wire going to an office building that has more than 10 or more child, you know, child care centers. It's just an office. In one case, there's a child care center right next to a wire service that's tied to the primary source of wiring money to Somalia. Don't want to go far, you can just walk next door after you rip off the state of Maine and Maine Care for hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. The suppressed Herald today had to report that there are services that were doing autistic support for autism. They're going to have to pay back the federal government something like $38 million. The suppressed Herald actually had to put that in their paper because it's out there. And you know who put it out there first? The Maine Wire. Were it not for the Maine Wire, you would likely never know about it because they've been covering up all these crimes and not reporting them, which is why it's called the suppressed Herald. This is the typical screed of a dying breed. Led by Steve Robinson, who presents himself as a hotshot investigative reporter, the site's influence is growing quickly to the detriment of political discourse in a state once known for its civility and equanimity. No, it was known for we had control of the state's messaging. Steve, you don't anymore. You are irrelevant now. You only speak to people that share your same extreme liberal views. But you're a dying breed, and your newspaper's dying as well. Last I heard, you're getting ready to disconnect from the printing. You will no longer print and distribute newspapers. You will just be 100% digital. It's a death spiral. You're going down, and not before long, because you're not an actual journalistic news organization. You're a propaganda machine, and that doesn't sell. So that's where we're headed. So we go on here with this screed. Led by Steve Robinson, who presents himself as a hotshot investigative reporter, the state's influence is growing quickly to the detriment of political discourse in a state once known for its civility and equanimity. Yeah, right. Today's conservative candidates tend to kowtow to Robinson, who recently collaborated on a project with Tucker Carlson. Now oh my goodness, Tucker Carlson allowing the Maine Wire to set the news agenda and even the prevailing tone of the campaign statewide. Well, let me ask you something, Steve. Letters to the editor. 10 to 1 are liberal letters to the editor to conservative letters to the editor. 10 to 1. I kept track for 2 years. I graded the paper every single day, the editorial section, and it's 10 to 1. And we're going into an election season, and that will be the prevailing ratio. And it is now. Today's paper, you have bash Trump, bash Trump, bash Trump, bash ICE, bash ICE, bash ICE, and prop up Democratic candidates. The latest one is Baldacci, Governor Baldacci's brother, who's now running to be governor, another Baldacci. So you've got, a praising letter for all the Democrats. You had the Graham Plattner run for a while, where they had editorial after editorial and letter after letter saying and defending Graham Plattner, although a lot of his things are indefensible, propping up Democrats, bashing Republicans. That's the editorial page of the suppressed Herald. So, Maine Heritage Policy Center, now the Maine Policy Institute, and its stated goal originally was to provide balance and a deeper level of analysis of the issues decided in Augusta that affect Mainers all over the state in a very real way. So it just goes on. But I think that one of the things that's really interesting, he goes after Steve Robinson personally here. And a Bowdoin College graduate who got his education in radio shock talk. No, he got his education in radio as a with the Howie Carr show. I believe he was the producer of the Howie Carr show. But it goes on, and this is the best part. Robinson peddles prejudice and calls it news. The day I realized just how material he had become to the Republican agenda in Maine came 2 months ago when I saw, to my horror, a photograph showing Senator Collins standing next to Robinson, as he won some little-known journalism award in the nation's capital. And then he bashes Senator Collins. She used to be a moderate, reasonable, and compromise-minded Republican. So, what we have here is a desperate screed to try and discredit Republicans again and take on this new news organization that's telling Mainers the truth about what's going on around them and the failures of the Mills administration and the government run exclusively in Maine by Democrats. And some of it's just screeds going on. But I think there's one line in here that's really, really good. We'll go on a little bit. Although Collins is by far the most prominent of the Republicans who have been friendly with this supplier of slime, okay? Now, he's saying our discourse has become very, very, disjointed and critical of that. Well, calling a competing news organization suppliers of slime, that's not a very good way to run an editorial. This says everything. Steve Collins is scared to death of Steve Robinson, who is becoming an effective, actual news journalist. Journalism is making a comeback in Maine, but not at the suppressed Herald. Shortly after jumping into the 2nd District U.S. House race, former Governor Paul LePage told WVOM that Democrats use taxpayer funds to register non-citizens as voters. His source for this baseless claim, the Maine Wire. It's not a baseless claim. The Maine Wire ran a story on it, and it's these same organizations, these NGOs that everybody's finding out about, funneling money from federal and state programs, social programs, through non-government organizations and funneling it into get out the vote organizations, and in some cases, non-citizens. Then he goes on. David Jones, a gubernatorial hopeful, devoted considerable attention this month to the Maine Wire hype question of whether a Somali representative elected to Lewiston City Council should step down. Nearly every word he uttered on the issue in a number of social media videos and posts came from the Maine Wire. What's wrong with that? If you're citing the news, it would be okay if, say, a Democrat cited the suppress Herald, which is the biggest bunch of propagandist liars in Maine. That's okay for Stevie Collins. But if you are citing actual journalism, actual facts from the Maine Wire, that's bad. On Friday, Jones issued a press release bragging about the media attention he's earned. The proof, we were all over the Maine Wire, he said, calling it Maine's fastest growing news media organization that is covering the real news. He finds this objectionable. Of course he does. The Maine Wire, again, is doing journalism. The Suppress Herald is nothing but propaganda. And he said, I could go on. It's clear to anyone watching that the Maine Republican Party has fallen in line with Robinson's website and its manic free for all social media presence. In other words, darn, these guys are getting successful and they're starting to show that we don't know what we're doing and that we're not real news. We're just propagandists. Darn it, darn it, darn it. Again, a manic screed from a dying breed. And he's getting finishing up here. While Robinson deserves nothing but scorn for his incessant bragging and for injecting so much darkness into our politics, the man has been successful in his aims. He should be a social pariah, and so far at least, he isn't. His site is now the dominant voice in Maine's GOP circles. Maine could, this is the best part. This is where Stevie Boy shows his hand. Maine could use a strong conservative news outlet to advance traditional conservative ideas. Traditional conservative ideas. None of this garbage of actually doing good things. None of this garbage about exposing fraud, waste, and abuse. Stop that. Do what conservatives have done in Maine and just bow down to the Suppress Herald and the Democrats. But that says everything. Maine could use a strong conservative news outlet. What that says is it has a strong liberal Democrat news outlet. He's admitting that the Suppress Herald is a liberal propaganda rag. Maine could use a strong conservative news outlet to advance traditional conservative ideas. There's merit in the political philosophy that champions holding down spending, minimizing taxes, and restraining government. The opposite of what we stand for. We, as in Stevie Boy and his propaganda team at the Suppress Herald. The Maine Wire isn't that outlet. An aggressive promotion of a newfangled Republican agenda of picking on the weakest, poorest, and often most troubled people in our society isn't just wrong, it's wicked. A hit piece on their competitor who's actually doing journalism. That's what this is all about. This, in a nutshell, from Stevie Boy here, is exactly what I've been talking about for a year. The Suppress Herald is not a news organization, it is a propaganda machine. And Stevie is losing his mind because they are going bankrupt. He doesn't think he's going to have a job much longer because they are laying people off. They've hired a couple of new people. They put out a news release on that. They lay off 20 and hire two, and then the two that get hired get put in the paper, like making it look like on the face that they're doing well. They're not. They're going down because they've alienated half the population of the state of Maine where they're based because they're been recognized as nothing but propaganda. And here's Stevie Boy. Oh boy, this is garbage. This is really embarrassing, to be honest, to put this screed in here attacking a competing news organization. Doesn't matter if it's more conservative leaning or anything else. What the Maine Wire has been doing is exposing a lot of the crime and a lot of the damage done by immigrants, this mass migration, I should say, mass migration that's overrunning the state, overrunning the schools, overrunning social services. Now we're finding out they're overrunning the social services by stealing them blind. Crime, all the rest, all that's being exposed, all things that the suppressed Herald never did expose, or their their so-called journalists, so-called reporters never wanted to look at. And there you have it. That is the suppressed Herald in a nutshell. And just one editorial, again, a a mindless screed by a dying breed. With that, we're going to check out, but please do share the Suppressed Herald podcast, follow it, and follow us on Rumble. Share it, tell your friends, tell your family. We're exposing what propaganda looks like on a local level. And as I've said many times, politics is local, so is propaganda, and we prove it every day. Have a good weekend.